Welcome to the Northern Business Podcast. It's budget day, so it's a special. Each week we talk to people who are active in the Northeast and Yorkshire and Northwest economy. We're sponsored by Virtue Motors, which is the UK's largest motor retailer. You can check out its website at virtuemotors.com. I'm Graham Robb. I own Recognition PR. We advise scores of businesses throughout the country, and some are featured on this podcast. Make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. In the studio today, we've Andrew Haley from Chartered Financial Planners Active, and also down the line we have Becky Hart, who's the Regional Director for Yorkshire at the CBI. And joining us in a few moments, he hasn't joined us yet, but he's going to, is Subra Manihan, Christian Harihaha. Now, Subra is the Deputy Director of Research and Information Systems at the Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. So welcome everyone. The budget has just happened, and there are some key points. I just flashed them up on the screen. The national insurance rate for employees was cut by 2%, 8% now. The non-dom status of extremely wealthy people who have a foreign domicile was scrapped. Also, holiday lets are now going to be subject to business rates. Business class flights will be taxed more. The child benefit taper will be moved so it starts at £60,000 rather than £50,000, and there'll be a new rule on single family earners, or single earner families rather, and double earner families, but that'll be phased in a few years' time. And there'll be a new ISA level of an extra £5,000 to put in your savings on UK equities. Well, they're just some headlines I picked. Andrew, what did you think of it? Did I pick the right headlines for us?
I thought that was a good summary, Graham. Thank you. Yes, I think it was a really positive budget. We had good news both on growth increasing, so ahead of some of the forecasts that we'd already had. We're looking at about 0.8% growth in 2024 and heading more towards that 2% range in the next year. And more positively as well, the inflation news, we spoke about it previously when we had our update, still at that 4% mark now, and we'll get an update on the 20th of March again on CPI. But it looks as though within the next few months we should be closer to that 2% target that the Bank of England have.
Now, these forecasts are from the Office of Budget Responsibility. They're the official forecasts that the government by law has to make its budget on.
Yes.
So they may not be absolutely correct, and in fact the track record of the OBR hasn't been perfect, but they do give the government a little bit more flexibility. He did do all sorts of other little things that saved people money that otherwise would have been levied: alcohol duty frozen, fuel duty frozen, and so on. What was your headline? What would you think? You're advising people in their investments, their pre-retirement investments. What do you think the most important thing was for you?
Yeah, I think the standout news is going to be the NI cut. Everyone sort of anticipated to some extent we would see an NI cut around that level. But I think the more interesting one was the high income child benefit charge. So moving that on, what people have felt has been an unfair tax. The talk of moving that to a household basis, which is still going to take some doing from HMRC, but moving that to a more fair basis and initially at least lifting those thresholds at which they start removing child benefit, I think will be a positive. And as a financial planner, that British ISA, obviously we'll still need to see the detail on it, is an interesting one. I like the fact that it was over and above the £20,000 that you'll already have, so it wasn't eating into your standard allowance.
So the other thing about that, and this, I suppose you're not really allowed to give investment advice, so we appreciate that, but I'll ask you in a way that you can give rounded view.
Yes.
Is it right that the UK government gives an investment in a UK equity a tax advantage, and maybe encourages people to invest in a UK equity rather than what's best for them? Because I don't know, if you're investing in, for argument's sake, shares in Apple or in Wall Street equities or property, that might be best for you.
It's a very fair assessment, because as we've seen over the last year alone, let alone 10, 20 years, the US has been the driver, and a global basket of shares would have been better than investing in our own UK-based or listed companies. You can see the obvious incentive from the Chancellor trying to promote investment into UK companies, driving the UK economy. But as a personal investor, are you going to let that tax incentive, and it's a relatively small one, we're talking about a £5,000 allowance, but what it will save you perhaps in dividend tax is quite minimal. Will that let you move away from your investment strategy, your normal approach to investing, in order to hopefully benefit the UK economy?
And you might do some good things with it. It depends how the products are structured. You might have small companies on AIM, or not necessarily FTSE 100 companies that you could. That would make a difference, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
to the smaller firms.
I think we'd love to see more in UK companies, because the FTSE 100 is actually really a global index. Those companies may be listed here, but they do business more globally. Your FTSE 250, the kind of next layer down, your more high street companies, we did actually see quite an uplift in that index today, and I think hopefully that's where we'll see more of the impact.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't checked that out before I came on the programme, but thank you very much. Subra, thank you for joining us. Nice to see you. And Becky, I'll go to Becky first, come to you in a moment, Subra. Becky, you're from the CBI, Regional Director in Yorkshire. Now, I've got your CBI submission here, and to be honest, you look like you got a lot of what you asked for. The CBI got several name checks throughout the budget speech as well. What was your take?
I think interestingly, when you read the first list of sort of the key takeaways, you could really tell in what context the budget was delivered. You know, it was an election year, so there was lots of politics in there, lots and lots of sort of personal announcements as well. But I think from a business perspective, you know, it is really good to see that sort of nod to extend capital expensing to sort of leased items. You know, it's not quite the full announcement that we wanted. You know, it will be a consultation, and there are caveats behind that. But a lot of businesses have said that will benefit them. So we'd really like to see a sort of bit more of sort of on the timelines around that. I think the announcements that were made in last year's spring budget about childcare were really important, and it was good to see that sort of more commitment towards the delivery of that. A lot of businesses say that affordable childcare is a really difficult way of actually getting is a barrier to getting people into work, and so we were pleased to see those sort of commitments as well. I mean, obviously there were things missing. I think the businesses were disappointed about the business rates relief not being extended, and we would have really wanted to see some more announcements around a sort of a green sort of roadmap in that sense, because that's something that especially businesses here in Yorkshire and the Humber, which is the biggest carbon emitter in the country, and really at the forefront of the net zero transition, are really keen to sort of see as well.
Now you
had a bit of a mixed bag, I'd have to say.
I think that's a very good assessment. You also wanted non-taxable health support for preventative, I suppose, mental illness things, and also getting workforce fit, so there's fewer absences from the workforce. And you wanted that to be possible to deliver by employers on a non-taxable basis, because obviously, if you give somebody private healthcare, that's taxable.
Yes.
So I hadn't really thought about that. I suppose if you were offering someone some counselling service, and you're paying a counsellor, that actually is a benefit in kind, isn't it? So making it non-taxable, sensible.
And the rationale behind that is again, we have a very high proportion of people who are not working due to long-term sick. So it's really to try and tackle some of those preventative measures, which actually can be enjoyed, by both small businesses, large businesses right across the country. So that's something that we will continue to talk to government about, because we do really think it's an important feature and would really help businesses.
One thing you did get was a full expensing of leasing and leased assets. Explain actually how that tangibly will help a business. I mean, I lease a photocopier. Does it help me there, or is it?
Yeah, so it would help both small businesses and larger businesses. So you could look at a lot of businesses, rather than buying assets, they would choose to lease them instead, because it's more cost effective for them. So when the big announcement was made in the autumn statement, which we've campaigned on for a long time about full expensing being enabled for purchases, the bit that was missing at that point was leased assets. And so we were really pleased to see that will be looked into. As I say, didn't quite go as far as we were hoping, and we do want to see some sort of clarity on timelines of that. But it is a nod to the importance of the fact that many manufacturers and other businesses right across the sort of spectrum do actually lease rather than buy.
I did like your point on the business rates, because that's a big expense and it's likely to go up. We don't know how much, but we do know that the councils are going to be allowed to increase council tax by 5%. So I'm assuming business rates are going to go up by a similar margin. Do we know?
Well, it normally is it's normally in line with sort of inflation. So obviously, when inflation was sat at 11%, that was a huge challenge. Now, obviously, we have seen it come down quite considerably, and yes, it might well get to the 2% Bank of England target sometime in the next couple of months. We actually expect that it might not stay there, but it will come down more sustainably in 2025.
Let's move on to Subra from Manchester, Greater Manchester Chamber of Commerce. Thanks for joining us, Subra. What were you thinking looking at the budget from Manchester? How did it look to you?
So I think we should position this in the context of the challenges that the economy faces at the moment. And if we look at those, we have issues with labor. We have issues with the ability of the UK to unlock investment, both public and private. And so on those two measures first, there was some good news, because the changes to the child benefit scheme, the increasing the tax threshold, the VAT threshold for micro businesses and self-employed from 85 to 90,000, and some of the changes to NI could indeed increase workforce participation, or at least increase the number of hours that people work without actually having to fear that there will be a penalty. So that's good news. On the issue of investment, the full expensing scheme did come in November. So there isn't much munition left in the Chancellor's armory to actually take more measures on to unlock business investment. So the leasing is good, but there are 4 words which actually made me slightly concerned, because it said when fiscal conditions allow.
Yes, very good point. Yes, you watch every little detail, Subra. Absolutely right.
So it is not set in stone yet.
Yeah.
But then, the other sort of bigger point for us is, what is the headroom that is available within the OBR forecasts, and how does the Chancellor use to deploy that headroom? Now, firstly, of course, the headroom is not set in stone, because it will change according to economic conditions. So the next fiscal event we have, whoever delivers that, probably later in the year, they are going to have different wriggle room with this. But if the funding for some of the measures that were announced today has to come from reduction in public spending and public investment, then we do not necessarily see that as a big positive, because, as the Chancellor himself mentioned, the long-term productivity in the UK, long-term economic growth in the UK, all depends on our having good public services. Right? So if you look at those departments which are protected, they might be fine. So health and education, for example. But if you look at then the rest of the services which are not protected, and then the issue was mentioned about mental health services, preventative healthcare, etc., actually is critically important, because in the Northwest particularly, and in Greater Manchester, the big contributor to economic inactivity is actually ill health. It's not necessarily the Great Resignation, which is true in some places in the wealthy South and Southeast, but not necessarily in the Northwest. And so, yes, it was a mixed bag. The British ISA is a good thing. Again, the question is, what is it for? Is it because you can, within the existing £20,000 allowance, actually invest on British equity? And then there are also details to be worked out, right? Because if you have a fund that invests in both US and UK shares, or in both UK and European shares, then is that eligible for investment under the British ISA? It's
a very good point. And also, there are other ways of investing that already attract tax relief, like EIS and SEIS, the enterprise investment schemes, aren't there?
Yes, there are quite a few schemes which are already available. So I think strengthening those would have been good. But I think the point of British ESAs, although it was presented as investment and unlocking investment capital, I don't think that was the issue. I think the issue was perhaps a political measure where if you are actually going to be saving and you have higher disposable income, this is an extension or an increase in the annual investment savings allowance.
Yeah, and it did also make it, I suppose, providing the products come to the market, it makes it easier for regular high street investors, people who will think about their savings to invest. The other schemes, EIS and SEIS, are for more competent, larger scale investors that pass the threshold of experienced investors.
Correct. And I think if we can redirect savings into the equity markets and actually look at the point which was extending the range of businesses who can actually benefit from this investment to the FTSE 250, etc. I think that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I'm not critical of that measure. I think it is a good thing. But how much investment capital will it unlock is what I am not sure about yet.
Well, just before we leave you, because I want to talk about Manchester specifically, we're going to flash some slides on from your reports about Manchester's growth, because you have your own index about Manchester's growth. And what's very interesting is that in the budget, the Chancellor announced these trailblazer deals for devolution in the North East, which is another part of the country our podcast is designed for. But Manchester, Greater Manchester, has had that kind of deal, in fact, even more devolution than the new Trailblazer deal. For many years, Andy Burnham has proved a competent administrator and has the trust of government. It's not a partisanship. You've made it work in Manchester. And you can see, looking at these graphs, what stood out for me was that Greater Manchester is beating the UK in terms of growth.
Yes, and that is true. So if you look at annual average growth, Greater Manchester has, in some years, many years, grown in some cases at twice the national average. So that is the result of devolution. It is the result of also investment which has come in. So 1996, if you cast your mind back to June, there was the IRA bomb blast in the heart of Manchester. What happened in the aftermath of that bomb blast was a regeneration of Manchester city centre. There was a huge amount of investment, commercial property, lots of housing, but also then other developments associated with the Commonwealth Games in 2002. And then that cycle has continued on. So yes, there was a dip in 2008, 2009 during the recession. But since then, again, David Cameron and George Osborne were committed to the Northbound Powerhouse. So there was lots of investment coming into Greater Manchester as a result of that. So, this is an area of great economic dynamism. This is an area that attracts businesses. It's an area where there are 4 or 5 universities which are actually attracting a huge amount of talent as well. So on those measures, actually, Greater Manchester has got a lot to give. Yes,
it's got media centre as well. But I think what we're seeing now, looking at the data, and I'm very interested in this kind of thing. I've served on bodies for development in the Northeast, so I watch it with a great deal of interest. And I think you've managed to achieve an agglomeration effect in Manchester now. It's gone so far that it's got its own momentum.
We certainly have. And we also have managed to develop Manchester as a very functional labour market. So, the functional labour market extends beyond the boundaries of Greater Manchester. So there are lots of people who work in Manchester but live in Liverpool, or vice versa. Lots of people, in Cheshire, Chester. They're also as far away as Stoke-on-Trent and Staffordshire. So I think the strength of devolution, local decision making, and then collaboration between local leaders is that you actually accelerate the agglomeration.
Let's pull Becky in, because Becky, you're regional director CBI in Yorkshire Humber. I know the patch I'm on. This programme comes out from Tees Valley, actually, where we've also got a strong mayor that's getting some action going. So the government in the budget today said they would give Trailblazer deal to North East. It also put some money into towns funds in Teesside and around the country, Yorkshire. But the Devo deal hasn't really settled at the pace that it is in the North East and in Manchester when it comes to Yorkshire.
Well, actually, Michael Gove, when he was up in Leeds last Friday, did make announcements about both South Yorkshire and West Yorkshire
Right.
in the fact that they would be at a level 4 deal. So that's
Yes.
with greater powers and greater funding than they actually get already. So you can see the direction that devolution is moving in around the region. And I think because by May of this year, the majority of the North will actually have a directly elected mayor. And I think once they actually start working really well together, and we've seen evidence of that already, I think that's really great news for businesses based in the north of England. And obviously, we've recently had consultations just finished, both in Hull and East Riding and also in Greater Lincolnshire area as well. And hoping, obviously, we're really hoping that they will have had a positive outcome, that they will be also electing a directly a mayor come next year.
All right, we're going to round up by asking you to score the budget. I'm going to ask you to score the budget, not from a political point of view. I don't think anyone watching this program really cares what your politics are or my politics, but from the point of view of our businesses, what was it the right budget for business at this time in the economy? I'll venture my score. It was a sort of 8 out of 10. I think it was a pretty good budget. It seemed responsible. That was my take. What do you think, Subra?
I would give it a 6 because I think one measure that we would have really liked to see is for small businesses, particularly, to be able to reduce the cost of employment. And on that, yes, we have given an NI cut to employees, but something to reduce the cost of employment would have been good. That would actually drive up employment as well. So on that measure, I would probably give it a 6 out of 10.
Fair point, well made. Okay, Becky?
I think I would agree with that, possibly for slightly different reasons. We did really want to see some more moves from a net zero perspective, and obviously the business rates, not announcing a continued freedom business rates was disappointing. I think from a personal perspective, I'm the chair of a Hull Truck Theatre, and so the theatre tax relief for in perpetuity is fantastic news.
Yes.
And that really, because it really helps them sort of develop the economy around culture, and I think the north of England again has got such a lot to offer.
Well, that's fascinating to know that, by the way, but I think our podcast should look at the cultural effects of the economy from a cultural point of view in the next few months. So watch this space. I might invite you back with a different hat on. What was your score?
Oh, well, from a business perspective, I would agree, a 6.
All right. Okay, and Andrew, you're slight. It's not just business for you; it's investors and people that you advise. Where would you score it?
Very true. And on that, I'm going to have to agree with you, and I'll go with a 7. I think I like the fact that there wasn't too much tinkering with pensions or inheritance tax, for example. Keeping things simple. We want a sustainable system that you can plan to. And some of the positives, we've yet to see, obviously, the detail on the ISAs, but some of those aspects, the changes to the tax system, making it a little bit more fair, I think that, on the whole, was a positive.
Well, Subra, Becky, Andrew, thank you for joining us on the Northern Business Podcast. Do feel free to join us again in the next few weeks. And if you want to be on the podcast, get in touch with Harry Sinclair, who's my producer. Thank you to him today. Also, thank you to Robin Campbell, my technical operator. Don't forget to like and subscribe to us on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts.